In this video, I'm going to show you how to add unit testing to your Java project in IntelliJ. So the first thing I'm going to do is clone a copy of the demo UI repository I've been using for these videos. So let's go ahead and cd c users mark downloads and make dir test cd test and git clone https github.com cis234a demo UI.get, and then let's go ahead and open that in IntelliJ. So I should have a test folder, demo UI, open that. And then let's go ahead and check the project structure. So I have an SDK set. I'm going to use 9. And then under modules, let's go ahead and add the dependency on our lib folder. And that's under dependencies, and then under sources, we'll make sure that the source is blue, and it is. So it should be okay. And then let's go ahead and run the project, make sure it works. So right click main and run. Okay, so here it is and seems to work correctly. Yep, everything's working good. Okay. So the first thing we want to do is find a class that we want to add unit tests to. So you can add unit testing to the database, but it's a little trickier to do the database than some of the other classes because the database content will presumably be changing. And also, you don't want your testing to make permanent changes to the database, so you have to also provide ways of undoing those changes. So you can definitely unit test the code in a database class, but it's a little trickier. So to keep things simple, I'm going to unit test one of the logic classes. And I should also talk about unit testing UI classes. Usually, those are going to involve multiple units working together to present an interface. And so the tools we're going to be looking at today aren't ideal for testing interfaces. There are other test frameworks that are good for that. So in terms of the logic classes for this particular project, I have 4 logic classes. There's an episode class, and it's got a constructor and a static method that fetches some stuff from the database, and some getters, no setters. And then genre is roughly the same. And show, that's similar to episode. There are some additional fields, but similar. And show type is similar to genre. So let's go ahead and take episode, since that's a medium-sized one. And adding unit tests is actually pretty easy to do in Java, and it's even easier after you've done the first one. So I'm just going to click on this episode class and Alt plus Enter. And then in the context menu that pops up, there's a create test bucket. And you can create a test in the same source root, that's same place. And then you can specify a lot of stuff. So for testing library, I'm going to be using JUnit 5. And it's not found in the module, which means we haven't used it yet in this project, basically. So I'm going to fix that. And I can specify which version of JUnit I want to use. Could go all the way up to 5.7 right now. I'm just going to leave it at the default, which is 5.42 for here. And then what this is going to do is it's going to use a tool called Maven to download the jar files that I need to use this code. And I can put it in a couple of different places. So my two big choices are basically I can make these files that are downloaded part of my project. So it knows that lib is a lib folder for my project, and it will download these jar files into the lib folder, which is right here. And then if I, commit the changes to the remote repository, anytime I clone the repository in the future, I'll get this version of JUnit as part of my project, and I won't have to do anything special. The alternative is not to download to the project folder, but instead what it's going to do is use a copy in IntelliJ, and it has to change the class path so it can actually find those jar files, and won't be part of the project, but it'll use whatever whatever version of the code I have associated with a version of IntelliJ if I clone the repository. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to download it to the lib folder this time and say OK, because I want to make it easy to work on this on different machines. And then now I have the option of creating my test class for episode. And it's going to go ahead and give me the option of automatically creating some test methods that are just going to be empty to start with. And I'm going to take advantage of that. So I'm going to go ahead and going to want to create test methods for all of those methods in episode and say OK. And what it did, I don't want to add it automatically to Git because I like to do that from Git bash. But what it did was it created an episode test class inside of the same package as episode was. And then it's using the same package as episode, and it automatically supplied some imports. So there's a test import, and also import the static assertions.star. So those are some test methods that I'll show you how to use. And then the way you create a test method in this class is using the @test annotation. And then you create a function that doesn't return anything and doesn't take anything as parameters, and you add your tests here. So let me start with an easy one, get ID. So how would I test get ID? Well, one way of doing it is to make an episode. And I'm going to skip everything except for the ID. So ID is a string here. So let's go ahead and make an ID, my ID. And then we'll just use zeros and nulls. And then num votes. So I made a new item, and the only value I've set is ID. So if my constructors worked and get ID works, then if I say e.getID, it should return this string. So let's make sure that's true. So I'm going to say assert equals, and then my actual value is, or actually my expected value is going to be my ID. And then my actual value is e.getID, like that. So here's a test, and I can go ahead and run this test right now in isolation. So I'm going to go ahead and click on there, run my getID test. And my test passes. So that works. So I'm going to fill in some of the other ones here. So let's do get season number. So this one, I'm going to put null here, and then for season number, we'll do 1, and then 1, and get season number, and then let's do get episode number. Actually, let me go ahead and copy these 2 lines. And I'm doing episode number, so let's do that. 2 is get episode number. And then this is going to be the title. So let's put a title in here. And year. And let's say I make a mistake here, or that my code doesn't work correctly. And then get rating. So let's make that 5.5. And then num votes. Okay, so that's test methods for all of my accessors. And I'm going to do fetch episodes in a minute. So I can run each of these individually the way I just showed you. So for example, I can click on get season number, and if I run that, it will go ahead and just run that test. If I run one that doesn't work, let's go ahead and run that. So this is how it shows up, and in my run window, it gives me some detail. So the expected value was 2021, the actual value was 2020, and then I can click to see the differences, which here is pretty easy to see the difference. But you can also assert equal with more complicated data structures. So in addition to running individual tests or rerunning them, if I'm trying to debug that, I can also run all the tests in my project, or all the tests in this test class. So I'm going to run all of the tests in episode test. And what I see is under test results, episode test, it runs each of my test methods, and they all pass except for get year. Now, if you have multiple test classes in your project, you can also right-click on your project and run all tests. And that will find all of the test files and all of the test methods in your project and run all of them. So that's a convenient way to test all of your code quickly. And then let's go ahead and do one that's a little more complicated. So this one, I'm going to so I'm testing fetch episodes. So I'm going to make an array list of, actually, let's look at the underlying method. So this is going to return an array list of episode, and it takes a string ID. So array list of episode, and then I'm going to call database, I'm going to call episode, fetch episodes, and this one let's go ahead and use an invalid ID. So I'm going to call this test fetch episodes invalid ID. And what I expect to get here, go ahead and import array list. What I expect to get here if I pass it an invalid ID is basically an empty array list. So this one, I'm going to use assert count, assert array count. No. Let's just use assert equals. And then I'm going to use episodes dot size is my actual, and then 0 is my expected. So I expect this call will not return any episodes. And then let's do another test here. This time I'm going to use a real ID, so let's find an ID. Oh, and let's go ahead and look for everything that contains the title Firefly. And there's actually a lot of things called Firefly, but what I'm interested in is the TV series here. So here's the ID from Firefly. And then let's go ahead and paste that in, use it as an ID. So fetch episodes, this is going to be a valid ID. And I'm not sure how many episodes this will return. So let's go ahead and run the method and see what kind of error we get. Okay, so this one, the expected was 0, actual was 14. So let me go ahead and change this to 14 and run the method again. Okay, so that worked, and this is pretty much all you need to know in order to add unit tests to your Java project.